We saw rape, gang rape, sexual assault, sexual torture, mutilation of bodies, burning of genital area, shooting of women in their faces, shooting in their genital area. The things that we have shown and the things that I think the report shows are unimaginable. How are we going to deal with them? How are we going to confront them? How are we going to prevent such atrocities in the future for the sake of our children?
I would like to know in a more specific way how Hamas did use sex violence as a weapon, and if there's a difference between the attacks on the kibbutzim and the attacks on Nova, and how do you notice any pattern or difference in terms of how they operated?
Thank you so much. So I want to say that, first of all, this report allows us to kind of step back and see the horror in its entirety. It's it's around 300 pages of documentation. More than half of it is documenting testimony by testimony, image by image. And after more than 2 years, we've been able to identify 13 patterns of sexual abuse that started on October 7th, continued during abduction and in captivity. And the fact that there were 13 patterns of abuse indicate similarities, indicate the way that the crimes were inflicted in a similar way against different people. And this is what led us to the conclusion that the sexual violence has been a strategy of Hamas, a strategy that was calculated, unfortunately inflicted with exceptional cruelty. If you ask about differences, I think the report has really outlines the different locations, but what strikes the most is the similarity, not the difference. The similarity between what happened to victims in Be'eri, in other kibbutzim, and then at the Nova, and then in captivity. So I'm not sure if people know that many of the terrorists got back to Gaza before even security forces were there. So we see the similarities between what happened in a different location, and when you read the report, it kind of strikes you the most. And I can say some of these patterns. We saw rape, gang rape, sexual assault, sexual torture, mutilation of bodies, burning of genital area, again and again shooting of women in their faces, shooting in their genital area. We also saw violence against men. We dedicate a section to the sexual humiliation and sexual torture that men endured. We felt that it's important to dedicate a separate section for that and to show what men have suffered. Some of them are very young men, some of them are minors, and I think this kind of the kind of suffering that we have documented has shown very, very disturbing tactics of terrorists. You know, I want to say something. The report points to the digital dissemination of the crimes, the fact that the terrorists film themselves. They sometimes use victims' own social media devices. They took their phones and uploaded the suffering of the victims through social media. They understood the power of social media and digital platform to amplify terror, to glorify this violence. Now we are actually working with the families that had to bear witness to the suffering of their loved ones.
You mentioned in the report that the main goal of Hamas was to perpetrate these acts, not only for the attack itself, but also for what's to come in the future, so future generations will fear. How does that psychological weapon work on not only the victims but on the families? What are the main testimonies and the main difficulties that the victims are experiencing 2 years after the episodes?
Yeah, it's actually one of the most important findings of this report. The fact that the terrorists took the phones, as I said, of the victims, sent family members images and videos of their loved ones being tortured. And I want to remind us all that families of hostages have endured this for months. Some of the families have received videos of their loved ones in the most painful moments. Some of them after they buried bodies of hostages that came back. Hamas sent them videos of the bodies of their loved ones. When we see the videos, we often tell Israeli audience that to avoid this because it terrorizes you. It kind of, it's people will never forget Shiri Bibas holding her babies and taken into Gaza. I hope people will never forget Shani Luke being taken into Gaza. Her body is being spat on by Gazan crowds. And I want to mention Ricarda Luke, the mother of Shani Luke. The report opens with her testimony, a testimony that she has given to the Civil Commission, where she shares the devastating moments on the day of October 7th when they received the video of her daughter, her beautiful young daughter taken into Gaza, and the screaming of her son. And it kind of, these are the testimonies that stay with you and that will stay with us for generations to come.
Did you acknowledge any Latin American victims and how and what were the difficulties of being a victim in a country that it's totally different from probably their roots, or it doesn't matter if they have lived in Israel in the last few years or staying on vacation? How different was the experience for Latin American victims of these sexual assaults and violence when you were doing your research?
I think it's important to share with you that the report reveals that the victims of October 7th come from 52 different nationalities, among them from Latin America, from different countries around the world, from Europe, from the United States, from Canada, from almost from every part of this of the world. It kind of strikes you to see the global impact that the atrocities have had. We understood that there are no official numbers anywhere of the victim nationalities. There are some estimations, some official estimations, but so we took upon ourselves to identify the nationality of the victims. And as I said, we found 52 different nationalities, among them victims from Latin America, from Europe, from Canada, from France. And I think this kind of tells you the global impact of these crimes, but more so the responsibility of different countries around the world to create real responsibility for counterterrorism offices, not only here in Israel, but elsewhere around the world, to learn the findings of this report. If there's one thing that is important for us now, is that this report does not remain the knowledge of feminist organization, of civil society, of academia. No, this report should be studied by national security experts, by terror experts that need to find way to combat, because this was sexual terror at its worst. Really, it was just the things that we have shown and the things that I think the report shows are unimaginable. In that sense, if you allow me one more second, in that sense, I think the report is a watershed moment because it shifts the conversation from whether these crimes happened to the far more important questions of how are we going to deal with them? How are we going to confront them? How are we going to prevent such atrocities in the future for the sake of our children?
Related to global victims, let's call them like that, since every life is a treasure, and there's no difference actually between a person which is attacked for country A or country Z. But in the case that these were people that weren't living in Israel permanently, do you think trauma works in a different way when attacks happen in a different context, or is it the same for everyone? It doesn't matter place or location
I think it's
whatsoever.
an excellent question. In many ways, the suffering or the empathy to the victims brought us closer to victims from different countries. For instance, one of the victims of the kibbutzim, a mother from Germany, she decided to move her life to Israel, despite the fact that her daughter was only visiting here, because she felt only here in Israel she can get this sense of community to share her grief, a sense of community that supports her. So that was interesting to learn how isolated families that live outside of Israel feel. Those that lost their loved ones here in Israel, and that their houses or that live in other countries feel isolation and very much lonely in the kind of experience of grieving over their loved ones.
When doing your research and interviewing victims and family, and well, I understand that victims are not only the victims themselves, but also the families, because they have experienced trauma as well as the victim, certainly. Both of them, did they, while doing the research, sorry again for repeating myself, did they ask for a message to be transmitted while doing the report? Is there something that they all share that you heard on different stages of the research?
Wow, that's also an excellent question. We meet hostages, former hostages, family members, survivors, first responders on a daily basis. And for each one of them, justice looks a bit different. But all of them want to be believed. All of them, especially those who have witnessed or experienced sexual violence, they feel that they have been questioned, that they have been become a target, instead of being embraced, instead of feeling that they are safe to share their experiences. They have experienced the opposite. So what we tell them today is that actually we believe this report creates a new reality for them. It puts such a substantial evidentiary foundation that I think that they will be questioned no more and silenced no more. We chose this title to express this kind of watershed moment from a reality that they were questioned to kind of, this is it. We've put the legal framework to show what happened in the most compelling way possible.
I want to circle back for something deep in the report, which is the 13 patterns of the way Hamas operate. Can we dig in a little bit more in detail of the examples of these patterns and the plan itself that we understand they had when you find out about the patterns?
Yeah, I think one of the most perhaps not yet known patterns, in a way that it's not defined yet, is the sexual violence that is used to torture family members. We documented cases in which family members were sexually humiliated in front of one another or sexually tortured. And in one case, there is a case of two family members that were forced to commit sexual acts on one another. And we decided to name this as genocidal sexual violence. Our previous report talked about the fact that many families bore witness to the torture of their loved ones. this report focuses on the use of sexual violence to destroy families, what it does to a woman, for instance, even in another country, in atrocities that we know happened outside of Israel, like in other countries, in other places around the world, that when a woman is being raped in front of her husband, it breaks the family, it breaks the foundation. Sometimes women find themselves isolated, being sent away from the community. Around these issues, there is so much pain and trauma and stigma that I think the report highlights the fact that sexual violence carried out in family settings creates such a suffering that is devastating in its scale. I want to say it amplifies the suffering when you see someone you love suffering. And I often say that this is hell. It's one thing to know, for instance, that you lost your loved one. It's another thing to see him being murdered, him or her. It's one thing to know that your loved one has experienced a sexual violence or sexual assault, and it's another thing to have to bear witness to it and see it in the most devastating ways possible. And we give voice to these cases, and I think it's kind of the more unique patterns that this report points to.
You as the leader researcher, I don't know how to call it, of course, but like you are
Yes.
the leader of the research. What kind of final conclusion or personal conclusion do you have after ending a 2-year-long research, and what are your expectations after the publication of the report?
That's a difficult question. I'll say that on the way here to do this interview, I was thinking that I have to say that among the victims are not only Jews, but also Muslims and Christians. And the report opens in the introduction with a case of a Muslim woman who was among the first victims of the attack. She was on her way to deliver a baby, and she was shot in her belly. She and her husband were ambushed twice, and her baby was she was able to give birth, and after 14 hours, her baby died. So the first victims was actually the youngest victim, and she was Muslim. So I feel it's important to remember that they targeted everyone. So that kinds of something that they targeted. When I say I have no doubt that they sought to target Israelis, and they sought to target Israelis as Jews. We talk about it in the report. But nonetheless, among the victims, there are victims from different nationalities and from different religions, and we need to remember that as well. I'm thinking, what else do I want to share? I want to share, perhaps as a concluding part of this is I want to recognize the consequences of the exposure to trauma, the exposure to such violence materials, and the trauma it creates among the documenters here in Israel and elsewhere around the world, people that have taken upon themselves to bear witness to crimes, to bear witness to the worst crimes possible, took upon themselves a huge burden. But I think the things that kept us going is knowing that we cannot prevent what we don't know. We cannot even begin to prevent what we don't know. So in this sense, I hope this report places a huge contribution here and to humanity itself.